Go back to the Amazon page right here. And again, we'll have a link to the Amazon page in the description right next to this video. You can also head to highriskmerchantaccounts101.com, and that links straight to this page as well. But I'm going to get on the Amazon page here. Check out these authors, Adam and Andy. We can follow those guys. Dive into the sample here, Andy, and let's actually head back to the table of contents here. I'm looking at the Kindle version now, but we can also look at the paperback version. A couple different options for you to kind of peruse through this book, get a sense of what's inside it before you buy it. I think I like this paperback version for today's purpose, though. But Andy, let's start off at the beginning here. Chapter 1, are you high risk? So this is helping people determine, should they read this book? Are they the target audience for this book? So again, just to reiterate, what does it mean to be high risk, and how do you know if you are a high risk merchant?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, the short answer, buy the book and read chapter 1. But we talk about the two different types of risks where you can be labeled as high risk. And one is industry risk, right? Just simply because of the industry that you operate in, you're tagged with that high risk label. So that's highly regulated industries. Another category of risks are operational risks, right? Those are things that, maybe because you are selling furniture online and it's a high ticket item and there's delayed fulfillment and, some of these operational issues that can also get your business tagged with that high risk label. One thing that I love in chapter 1 that Adam and I included, this is on page 24. I call these the controllables, right? And it's just a list of things, especially if you own an e-commerce business or operate an e-commerce business. These are things that you can do and things that you can control, right? That mitigate and lower your risk. Things like having a clearly written terms of service or terms and conditions page, having a visible refund and cancellation policy that's easy to find, right? If you have any kind of an e-commerce subscription product, make sure it's easy to find out how to cancel, shipping policy, including trust seals and things like that. These are all things that are in your control. And in an industry where so many things are out of your control, I love that we have this little to-do list of things that are totally within your control.
That's absolutely right, Andy. That's a great little to-do list here. I've scrolled down to that page in the preview. This is a pretty generous preview. Gets you the first couple chapters. It looks like first several dozen pages. That number 3 on that list there, a visible refund or cancellation policy. I'll admit I screwed that up early on. I run a high ticket membership product with recurring monthly billing, and I used Stripe for a while, and then eventually transitioned over to SoarPay when the size of the group, the product I was offering, the market for it grew to a size where I realized, boy, I'm in trouble here if I get flagged and banned. And I don't know if I'm high risk, maybe I'm medium risk at least, Andy. But I just felt a lot more comfortable using SOAR payments. And, at one point I realized I didn't have a refund or cancellation policy on my website. So I made sure I rectified that the day I realized I should probably have a black and white plain text policy on how we handle refunds and all that stuff. So anyways, enough about me. Let's go back to the book now. Chapter 2 is payment processing explained. So once you determine whether you are high risk or not, now you and Adam get into payment processing. So tell us about chapter 2.
Yeah, and this is really just a crash course on how payments work, Jimmy, especially how credit card payments work. So we talk about the 4-party model, right, where you have the card holder and then you have the merchant, and then in between those two, you have the issuing bank and the acquiring bank. And then we also discuss the difference, and a lot of these terms trip people up. They even trip up people in the industry, but the difference between a PayFac and a processor and a merchant services provider. One thing I do want to mention, Jimmy, is our book was not intended to be an exhaustive technical description of everything going on in that, payments stack, right? There's actually another book called The Anatomy of the Swipe that I recommend to people all the time. It's a fantastic book. If you want to get more technical, like if you're a web developer, if you're building some sort of application that interfaces with the payment stack. Whereas our book and our introduction to payment processing, it's more from that perspective of a business owner. We want to tell you what you need to know, but not a bunch of extra.
Oh, that's one of the things I like about Andy is it comes in at a reasonable 128 pages. This isn't some 700 page tome that I have to go through over, a week or a month. It was a quick read. I was able to get it in a weekend. It really did tell me everything I needed to know as a CEO, as a business owner about payments. It was very helpful. Chapter 3 and chapter 4. Let's dive into those two chapters. Get ready to apply and going for the home run. Tell us about these chapters, Andy.
Yeah, and so these two chapters are really about how to apply for a merchant account and understanding the underwriting process, right? So before you even apply for a merchant account, we walk you through here are all of the things you should have at the ready, right? There's nothing worse than getting halfway through an application of any kind, including for a merchant account, and realizing, oh, I need all of this other information or I need these external documents. So we basically give you a checklist of here are the documents you need. Here's the information you're going to need if you're applying for a merchant account with any merchant services company. You're going to need these. So we give you that checklist. But then another thing I think that we do pretty well is we coach you to look at your business and look at your merchant account application through the eyes of an underwriter, right? So one thing that Adam and I have found is that a lot of people make avoidable mistakes on their application, right? It's like usually with underwriting, there's not one issue, right? Where if someone's application gets denied or rejected, it's not just one issue. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's compounding issues, right? Where you have a little issue here and another little issue there, and then a bigger issue here, and it all kind of adds up. Whereas if you're ultra organized and you have all of your ducks in a row and you can sort of look at your application through the eyes of an underwriter, we think that that best positions you, even if your business has had some operational challenges, or maybe you've had a spike in chargebacks, you can be transparent about that. And because your application is so organized and you have your ducks in a row, it's a lot easier for an underwriter to look at it and say, okay, they've had this one problem, but they are mitigating it. And in all other respects, they look like a solid business. So I think it's important that business owners do understand the underwriting process. And I mean, I think that's true for anything in life, right? If you're going to go try and get a loan, you're going to be rewarded if you go get a loan with a lower interest rate, depending on how convincing you can be to the underwriter, right? So the same thing is true in payments. The more that you can put together that very solid application, ultimately, I think it does pay you back.
And then moving on, Andy, chapter 5 is payment types and risk factors. What are the different payment types and what else is this chapter about?
Yeah, broadly, you have card present and card not present transactions, right? So the card not present, think of e-commerce or ordering something over the phone. And so generally, card not present transactions are higher risk than card present transactions. And that's why at SoarPay, we've had so much of a focus on e-commerce, right? Because oftentimes it's those card not present transactions that are a real challenge for people. And we also in this chapter we address subscription billing and recurring billing because that's sort of its own animal, as you well know, Jimmy, with your personal experience. There's a lot of the devil's in the details. There's a lot of things you need to know and understand about subscription billing if you have any kind of a business with recurring revenue. So we discuss all those different kinds of transactions in chapter 5.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And me personally, I'm looking at this risk matrix table on page 78. I think this is my favorite table in the whole book, Andy, describing these 4 different types of transactions. There's card present, right? That's one of the more traditional ones, especially if you're running a brick and mortar. People are walking in with their wallets and pulling out the credit card and handing it to you or tapping it on your point of sale. Then we've got e-commerce. That's the one I have a lot of experience with. Card not present. Everything I do is online, so I have a lot of e-commerce and recurring billing where card is also not present. And then you get into Modo as well. So just a really helpful breakdown of what each one of those different types of transactions is and the different levels of risk associated with them. I learned a lot reading this book over the weekend, Andy. Let's move on to chapter 6 and 7. Stop chargebacks before they start and keeping in good standing. That's 6, 7, Andy.
Yeah, and with chargebacks, I think when Adam and I started writing the book, we thought chargebacks are going to be one of these huge topics that we cover in the book. And that did end up being the case. We do have a whole chapter about chargebacks, but really the big picture, the big broad picture of having a successful payments strategy is so much more than just chargebacks, right? But we talk about those best practices and those operational practices that can help you minimize chargebacks, which isn't just a matter of using specific apps or tools. It's also just strategic and tactical in terms of thinking through your customer experience. So we definitely do recommend tools, but we also talk about that chapter 7 and keeping in good standing, account maintenance and account health is so important. And we really walk people through here are the 4 main metrics you need to track. Think of it like you have a dashboard and you're kind of monitoring like an automotive dashboard and you're looking at oil temperature and you're looking at engine temperature, right? You're looking at those key metrics on your dashboard just to make sure, okay, is my payment system holding up right now? If I've had a couple chargeback spikes or maybe I've had some what looks like from the outside is unusual activity because I've had a spike in sales or something like that. So we just kind of, again, from the eyes of an underwriter, how does your payments account look from the outside? And we sort of teach merchants how to look at that so that they can proactively, for instance, if you're a merchant and hey, I'm running this huge sale next month for the 4th of July, and I think that my sales might triple from their normal volume. You read this book, you understand, oh, that's something I might want to give my payment processor a heads up about so that when they notice this pattern of payments activity that looks unusual, they understand like, oh, okay, this is normal. This was planned for.
And then in chapter 8, you actually provide some really practical, tactical suggestions of tools, right? Chapter 8's titled The Right Tools in Your Toolbox. It's all about building a resilient infrastructure and capital stack. Andy, tell us a little bit more about that chapter.
Yeah, so the resilient payments stack, and back to what I said at the beginning of the webinar, Jimmy, which is I'm not anti-Square, anti-Stripe. If you are a hobbyist farmer and you're selling your wares at a farmer's market and you want to just sign up at Square and use that as an easy solution at the farmer's market, I think that's perfect. I would highly recommend that. It's simple, it's easy. You're not doing so much sales volume where you really need to put a ton of thought into it. However, if you're an e-commerce merchant and you are processing 7, 8 figures of revenue a year or more, 9 figures of revenue a year, you really need to have resilience in your payment stack. And one thing, when I was interviewing Greg Myers, he referenced that this modular, quote unquote, modular approach is being increasingly popular, Jimmy. So, me and my sons, we love Legos. Thinking about your payments infrastructure as interchangeable pieces where you can control each layer of the stack and you can choose tools for each layer of the stack. And then obviously they need to play nicely with each other. They need to be compatible with each other. But contrast that with the PayFac model, right? The Square or the Stripe, where it's a closed loop ecosystem, which is great as long as everything is going well. It keeps things very simple. But then as soon as you have a problem, and if you need to, God forbid, you need to leave that payment solution, if you need to leave Stripe or Square, all of your infrastructure was built around that closed loop. And so you're starting from zero. Whereas with a more resilient and modular payment stack, you might have some interchangeable pieces, right? So maybe you change payment gateways, or maybe you change your point of sale system, but you don't have to start over from zero when you do that.
That's great. Some really great advice there, Andy. And then finally, to wrap up the book, chapter 9, the right payment partner. Tell us about that one.
Absolutely. Well, finding the right payment partner is as simple as going to SoarPay.com. I kid. But in all seriousness, you need to find the right tool for the job, right? And you need to find the right partner for your business. And a lot of times what that means is industry expertise, right? Because different industries have different underwriting requirements. They have different operational challenges. They have different best practices associated with their customer experience and associated with their payments infrastructure. So if there's one thing, if a merchant comes to me and they're asking about how do I select a provider, that's honestly where I would start, is start with your industry. What payment provider has credibility and longevity in your specific industry?